Welcome, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to kick off this episode by starting with our listener mailbag.
You've got mail.
So this is coming from Simon on Twitter. His handle is @greenhope42. He says, thanks to @thechessangle for the recent episode about playing opponents rated lower. Being in the bottom 20% of my club is not a situation I'm in often, so the advice in the episode was great. Would love a reverse episode with advice for playing opponents rated higher. Well, you got it, Simon, because I definitely have some thoughts on that. A number of people asked about that as well, and I also appreciate the kind words about the podcast. And I'm going to share my insight as a tournament player on and off for many years, as well as someone who runs a chess club and has seen hundreds of amateur games. So this week is all about higher rated opponents. And as with the episode on lower rated opponents, I'm generally referring to players who are about a minimum of 300 points higher. Before I discuss some strategies on how to handle these players on the board, let's talk about higher rated opponents in general and from a philosophical point of view. Now, a bit of a reality check. Chess hates the underdog. That's been said. Statistically, the higher rated player will win most of the time. They make fewer mistakes. They're generally better prepared. They can handle some unpredictable situations that may happen on the board better than lower rated players, etc., etc. But it's still possible to beat them, and this is especially true at the club level, as we'll see in this episode. Now, higher rated players, they generally hate playing lower rated opponents, and some even get resentful or annoyed. You know, it's like I have to play for 2 to 3 hours, maybe more, to get like 2 rating points or to get like 5 rating points. And if that lower rated player is underrated, you know, it can certainly be a real struggle, and the higher rated opponent isn't really going to get rewarded that much. So all the pressure is on them, is on the higher rated player. So you have ego, you have the potential to lose a lot of rating points, the potential to go on tilt, the potential to lose standing in the tournament, all that stuff. So as a result, an argument can be made that as the lower rated opponent, you have a psychological advantage. And here's a new phenomenon that I'm now experiencing as a TD. I now get asked by adults, you know, some of my most regulars, when they're paired against an unrated, quote unquote, unrated kid or someone lower rated that they don't know, I'll get all questions like, you know, what's his deal, Neil? You know, is he stronger than his rating? You know, what's the deal now? I never used to get questions like that, but now I do. And it shows that the higher rated player often gets nervous about that. So all the pressure is really on the higher rated opponent if you think about it. The other thing I can tell you, as a player at the club level for many years, as a tournament director for many years, upsets happen quite often, all the time really. They're not that uncommon. And higher rated players, they blunder and make mistakes all the time, or they move thoughtlessly and they think the game will win itself. Again, at my club, I know there have been lots of upsets, and in cases where it wasn't an upset, there have been many games that were very, very close. I can think of one game where we had one adult rated 800, and he was playing like someone rated, I think, like 1990. I'm giving you approximate numbers. And the 800 player almost won. In fact, he had a few wins and he missed them. And boy, was the higher rated opponent really sweating it out because he was playing thoughtlessly. He thought the game would win itself. Even someone like our friend I am Jay Bonin. We all know Jay, one of the most active, maybe the most active tournament player ever. He's a friend. He's a friend of the podcast. Now, when Jay was very active, he actually drew a lot of Class A players, like 1,800, 1,900 players, that range. He actually drew a lot of them. I mean, when I drew Bonin, I was only about 1630, and I'm going to explain my thought process in that game. But the point is that these higher rated players, they will draw or lose games against lower rated players quite a bit, more often than you might think. In addition, at the club level, the time controls are quicker than in the major events, and your higher rated opponent is presumably playing after a full day of work as well. So mistakes are just as likely from them as they are from you. So you probably have a better shot at beating them at club events, but I will say, even at the major events with more traditional classical time controls, higher rated players will drop games to lower rated players all the time. Now, a little bit of a sidebar now. This is something else to think about if you're rated about 2,000 or higher, right? So for our experts out there, maybe for our masters out there listening, there's an argument, and I agree, that once you're about 2,000 or so, it almost makes no sense to play at the club level from a ratings or mathematical point of view. I'm not talking about love of the game and just wanting to play, but strictly from a numbers aspect, from a ratings aspect, it almost doesn't make sense. This is because the overwhelming majority of club players are rated below 1600 for the most part. There are exceptions, like there are clubs out there where they tend to be very strong clubs. Like when I played at the Queen's Chess Club many, many years ago, there was a period where there were a lot of experts where many players were rated above 1800 or above 2000, where it skewed higher. Most clubs nowadays, though, it seems to me, just based on anecdotal evidence, tend to skew lower. It's more of a bell curve, but sort of. I mean, it tends to skew to the left a little bit more. And as I said, most club players are rated below 1600, probably between 1,000 and 1,500 or so. I think that's where most of your club players are going to be at, a lot of unrated players. But here's the thing, if you're rated 2,000 or higher, when you play at the club level, you're essentially just playing to maintain your current rating, and it may actually decrease because think about it, you're playing mostly lower rated opponents. There are going to be upsets, and then when you do get upset, you're going to have to work very hard to get your rating back. So in other words, let's say you have a rating of 2,100 and you're playing in a tournament where most of the players are like 1,500, 1,000, 1,200, you're essentially just playing to maintain your current rating, if you think about it. I think I was talking to Brian Caron about this a while ago. Brian, I know you listen to the pod, so you'll let me know. I think it was Brian. But when I was taking lessons many, many years ago with the late IM Danny Kopech, he used to say that about himself. I mean, Danny would say, yeah, I'm an IM, but, you know, if I play an expert or a 1900, he goes, there are going to be some draws, and he goes, I might even lose. So, you know, there was no ego with him. He knew that there was a chance that could happen. It was kind of like a Bonin situation because Jay played so many tournaments that it was bound to be a situation where he was going to draw or maybe lose some games to lower rated players. I mean, if you play that much, it's just impossible. It's just humanly impossible to bring your A game every night. So Danny used to say, you know, for me to play at the club level where I'm going to be significantly higher rated, it just doesn't make sense. And he even said, he goes, I know that, you know, I'm going to draw some games. I'm going to give away some draws to lower rated players. He goes, I might even lose. So he goes, it just doesn't make sense. And again, he wasn't saying that as sort of like an elitist type thing. He was just saying from a numbers point of view that it just doesn't make sense for him. And I understand that completely. So that's just a theory that's out there. I tend to agree with it. Very interesting to talk about. So understand there's no formula or recipe for beating higher rated players. I know improvers like clear-cut, step-by-step plans, but it just doesn't work that way. But I will offer some suggestions and some ideas to think about. Some of these you may have heard, some of them may be new, but here we go. Now, the standard method, the standard approach to beat higher rated opponents, and I've mentioned this before, is to create complicated off-book, atypical positions. But understand, this isn't going to work for everybody, but that's generally the recommended method. It's the famous quote by Tal. I think I mentioned this quote in the last episode. You must take your opponent into a deep, dark forest where 2 + 2 = 5, and the path leading out is only wide enough for one. So his whole thing is you need to create a situation where sort of you're both confused, and hopefully that confusion will lead your opponent into making a mistake. Now, it's double-edged because you're going to be confusing yourself as well. But the idea is that you are making it difficult for your opponent, because if you're playing positions that he knows and that he's comfortable with and he's relying on his theory, they're going to be very, very difficult to beat. Now, I'm going to read an excerpt from Chapter 6 of Chess for Tigers by Simon Webb. He has a chapter on beating lower-rated opponents and one on beating higher-rated. And the method I just recommended, the whole Tal thing, he recommends in Chess for Tigers. This is sort of a well-known chapter from this book. So I'm going to read a paragraph. He says, the basic principle is to head for a complicated or unclear position such that neither of you has much idea what to do, and hope that he makes a serious mistake before you do. Of course, you are still more likely to lose than to win, but by increasing the randomness of the result, you are giving yourself more chance of a quote-unquote lucky win or draw. This is exactly the opposite approach to that recommended in the previous chapter on how to beat weak players. There, you were trying to keep everything under control so that your greater skill would pay off, whereas here you should be happy to let things get completely out of control so that neither player can predict the consequences of his actions, for then you might happen to come out on top. So that's a very, very interesting, very powerful paragraph. That's from page 52 of Chess for Tigers. Highly recommended book. That's the book, just as a side note, that's the book on chess psychology that you want to start with. Whether you're a beginner or an advanced beginner, or even if you're an advanced player, even if you're a master, Chess for Tigers is definitely the starting point for chess psychology. It's accessible to everybody. It's going to be most beneficial to club level players and improvers, but it's fantastic. I know a lot of experts who are friends of mine who rave about it. It's Chess for Tigers by Simon Webb. I've mentioned it many times before. I'll put a link in the show notes. And then after this book, you can go on to the 7 Deadly Chess Sins. That's a little more advanced, but Chess for Tigers I highly recommend as your starting point. But he talks about playing higher rated opponents and lower rated opponents at length. And all of this reminds me of the De Groot, right? De Groot was a chess master and a psychologist. It reminds me of the De Groot experiments where GMs did better than amateurs solving puzzles from standard positions. But when the GMs were shown odd, atypical, almost unrealistic positions, they did no better than the amateurs. Very interesting. I'm sort of paraphrasing how the exact study was undertaken, but that was the basic idea. When the puzzles were from standard positions and standard theory, they did significantly better than the amateurs. But when they were shown puzzles that were almost artificial, like they were very strange positions that would normally not occur or probably would never occur in an actual game, those positions they did no better than the amateurs. So it's all about pattern recognition. So the whole idea with Tal and Chess for Tigers is that by creating these complicated positions, yes, you're making it difficult for yourself as well, but the argument is that it's your best shot to beat them. But as I said before, it's not going to work for everyone, and I'm going to talk about some other ideas. So as I mentioned, regarding this standard method of creating complications, that's not going to work for everyone, and a lot of players will not be comfortable doing that, and the results might be even worse, even though that's the suggested method. However, I will submit to you that extremely solid play often works too. In other words, you can just play like you normally would, play openings you know well, be cautious, but don't play afraid. And whichever method you you need to get them to tilt. That's really the goal. When I say get them to tilt, meaning they become impatient, they get frustrated, and then they start to force the issue. The most annoying thing for a higher rated player is a lower rated opponent who's playing solidly, who's seeing all the threats, and who's not making the mistakes that the higher rated player is expecting them to. That's the best way to get into their head. Now, the other thing, and as far as my own experience, just as an amateur player, as a TD, okay, because we all know I'm not a titled player, but the most important thing that I have to offer in this episode is that you have to believe that you can win or at least draw. But it's a little more than that. Let me explain. And it's a little different from that. We're going to do a little variation. So hear me out. Now, I struggled with this for a long time playing higher rated opponents. I would have this defeatist attitude, especially when I was lower rated than I am now, like when I was in the 1400s or so. But I changed my mindset and I started getting draws and wins against higher rated opponents. Now, here's what I did. Rather than say, I'm going to beat or draw my higher rated opponent, like I'm going to beat this guy, I said that yes, statistically, I'm likely going to lose, but I'm going to give him a tough game and have him respect me as a player. If he's going to win, I'm going to make him sweat it out. In other words, if he's expecting an easy game, he's got another thing coming. So basically, when my mindset was, I'm not going to play like some chump, I'm not going to kiss your ring. If you're going to beat me, you're going to work for it. And when the game's over, you're going to respect me as a player. That's when I started drawing and beating high-rated opponents, especially draws. I started getting a lot of draws at that point against high-rated opponents when, initially I was losing a lot. And I don't think it was that I was just getting stronger as a player. I really think it was a mindset. So don't think like, I'm going to win, I'm going to beat this guy. Just think, I'm going to get you to respect me. I'm going to make it tough for you. And even if I lose the game, I want you to walk out of here thinking, wow, this guy played really well. I don't know if I want to be paired against him again. That's what you want. Okay. I'm not going to walk out of here and you're going to think I'm some chump. And again, this is all inside. You're not going to show this externally or be unsportsmanlike, but that's kind of the attitude you have to have. Because I think if you say, I can beat this guy, I'm going to beat this guy, I think that's putting too much pressure on you. But of course, you don't want the other end of it, which is that, why should I even bother? This guy's so much stronger than me, which is what I was doing, which is horrible. That is not a headspace you want to be in. So just think, I'm going to get this guy to respect me as a player. And if you beat me, fine, but I'm going to make you work for it. And like I said, when I had that mindset, I started getting better results. Now, before I forget, and this is important, if you're looking for a major increase in your rating, by that I mean like 100 points higher or getting to the next rating class, you have to start drawing and stealing some wins from higher rated opponents. You have to. You have to step up your game in that regard. For example, if you're a Class C player rated 1400 and you're itching to get to 1600, which is Class B, you're not going to do it just by beating up on 1000 players. Those extra rating points that you will hopefully steal from higher rated players will also act as a buffer against the occasional bad loss. But again, if you're looking for a major increase, and who isn't? If you don't want to just keep bouncing back and forth between the, same 50 points, or if you want to get more than just like a 50 or 60 or 70 point increase, you're going to have to start stealing wins and draws from higher rated opponents. That's the only way you're going to see a major improvement. So like if you're 1,000 and you want to get to 1,400, you need to cause some upsets. If you're 1,600 and you want to get to 1,800, or if you're 1,800 and you want to get to like 2,000, you need to have some upsets. You need to get some draws and wins against higher rated opponents. That's very, very important if you want to look at a big boost in rating. Now, just a few other ideas. One thing, and this is a little bit of a trick, what you can do is make a quote unquote offensive or a strategic draw offer in an even or slightly better position. You have to do this judiciously. It doesn't always work, but the idea is to put pressure on your higher rated opponent and get in his head a little bit with the hopes that he slips up. Now, this is all legal. This is ethical. You have every right to use a draw offer strategically, even if you don't really want one. What's not ethical, or what is against the rules, is repeated draw offers. It's considered unsportsmanlike if you offer a draw in a losing position, that type of thing. That's not cool. But some people will tell you, and this drives me nuts, well, it's considered disrespectful to offer a draw to a higher rated opponent. I don't know what they're sprinkling on their breakfast cereal. That is complete and utter nonsense as far as I'm concerned. It goes by the position, okay? It should go by the position. So before I get into this offensive or strategic draw offer, just about draw offers in general, if you're facing a high rated opponent and you feel the position's even, you have every right to offer a draw. So the idea that, I don't want to offer him a draw because he's higher rated, I don't know where people get that, but the idea that that's disrespectful or unsportsmanlike is a bunch of baloney. You have every right to offer the draw, and again, it should go by the position. Now, if you're losing, if you dropped your queen against a higher rated opponent and you offer a draw, that's just cheesy, all right? There's no place for that. That's not what we're talking about. But I mean, if it's an even position, dead even, or it's, very, very unclear, you have every right to offer the draw to your higher rated opponent. So I was just putting on my TD hat there for a minute. So let's get back to this idea of offensive or strategic draw offers. Now, one thing that's very, very important, this technique is most effective when you're slightly better. And again, know that it's not always going to work. All right. But it works best if you're like slightly better. Now, you may say, if I'm slightly better, why am I going to offer the draw? Well, that's not a guarantee you're going to win. Now, if you're clearly winning or crushing your higher rated opponent, don't offer the draw, please. Continue on for the win. But if it's even, or maybe preferably you're a little bit better, it works best. To be clear, you can use this technique whether you really want the draw or not. And you may try this when you really don't want the draw, and he'll accept. I mean, that's happened to me where I was even or slightly better, and I tried this technique and I said I offer a draw, and to my amazement, they took it, right? One guy just wasn't feeling well, and then I think another guy was, I don't know, it was something, it happens, you'd be surprised. So, you may not want the draw because you're using it to get into his head, and then, they end up shaking your hand. So, you'd be surprised how, that can work sometimes. But the idea, just to be clear, you offer a draw, preferably when you're slightly better, could be an even position. And the idea is that you're putting pressure on your opponent, because if he declines your draw, he's basically saying, well, I think I can win it. And now all the pressure is on him. And it's a little more of a nudge when you're better, because it's almost like you're kind of like teasing him a little bit. Like, he'll know. Like, if you're the low rated player and you're slightly better, trust me, he knows you're slightly better. Now, again, this is not always going to work. Some guys are going to laugh at it and they're going to keep playing. And you can't overuse it, but it's something to have in your toolkit, this sort of offensive or strategic draw offer when you really don't want it to get in your opponent's head. But the benefit is, if he does take it, you'll get, because you have draw odds, because you're lower rated, you'll still get some rating points. So it's a very, very effective play. But again, you got to really pick your spots when you use that. Now, something else, and I spoke about this with Jay Bonin, is the rope-a-dope, right, from Muhammad Ali. That can be very effective against higher rated opponents. You basically sort of rope them in and then go in for the kill, right? You give them a false sense of security, and the hope is that they will become impatient, they'll force the position or overextend, and then you exploit that mistake, and then you win or maybe draw the game. So that's another technique you can use. And the last thing I will say, and this is one of the most important things in this episode, you need lots and lots of over-the-board experience. Beating high-rated opponents or drawing them and winning games in general, it comes through experience. A lot of chess growth you need to play through. It's not going to come by studying and playing online and doing Puzzle Rush. Those things will help. I'm not bashing those things. I do those things myself, but nothing beats experience. And as I discussed with my good friend, Tim Mirabile, who's a master, there are some things that you just need to play through. A book's not going to help you. A puzzle's not going to help you. You just need to be sitting at a board in a live tournament and take your lumps. That's so important. I can't emphasize that enough. You need a lot of over the board experience. These are things that it sounds doable and it sounds easy in the abstract, but once you're there, implementing them is going to take some time and some experience. So that will do it for this week. A little bit of a shorter episode. I think the content was very direct and to the point, but a little bit shorter, but that's okay. Sometimes that's good. We're all busy. A shout out to our sponsor, Chessable.com. Their courses are great. There's a link in the show notes as always. So to summarize, this episode was about beating higher rated opponents, or really how to approach higher rated opponents. I would say that mindset is a big part of it, confidence, and understanding that high rated opponents also make mistakes and that you have a good chance of drawing or beating them, especially at the club level. So don't sell yourself short. Thanks so much for listening. Hopefully we'll have a guest very soon. I apologize for that. This has been a string of solo episodes. I've just been very busy with other things, family, career, all that stuff. You are as well. That's why you're listening to this podcast. But I need to kind of get back on the horse and start booking some guests. That's actually a whole process, but hopefully very soon we will have some guests. So this season has kind of been a throwback to season 1 where I did a lot of solo episodes, but that's okay. I'm not saying that as a criticism because these are all topics that I've wanted to talk about. I usually keep a notebook of different ideas. So I'm checking a lot of boxes this season, but don't worry, we're going to have some guests as well. Looking to go back to that. Have a great day, everybody. And as always, I hope you win your next game.